The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 129.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library,
the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book
that will enable you to grow personally and professionally.
Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the EL. Today we have Michaela Csik, author of The Business Model Navigator. Welcome, Michaela, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thank you, Wade, for having me.
Will you take just a moment before we take a deep dive into your book and introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Yeah, sure. So, my name, as you said, is Michaela Csik, and I'm working at the moment as an innovation manager at Holcim, one of the world's leading suppliers of cement and aggregates. And there, I'm mainly responsible for new business models. Before that, I worked at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. And during that time, I had the chance to work with Oliver Gassman and Karin Frankenberger on the Business Model Navigator book. So it's a result of our 4-year research process. And all this happened in my time as a PhD student at the University of St. Gallen.
Excellent. So first off, thank you for sharing that. And now let's jump right into your book, The Business Model Navigator, which was just made available for purchase back in October 2014. And will you give a quick plug? You co-authored this, correct?
Yes, I'm a co-author, and we have 2 more authors, so Oliver Gassman and Karin Frankenberger. Oliver Gassman is a professor for innovation management at the University of St. Gallen, and Karin Frankenberger is an assistant professor.
Okay, excellent. Very good. Thank you for that. And Michaela, we're going to move quickly, but we're here to cover the top questions that our listener/reader would love to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing the Business Model Navigator?
Yeah, so there are 2, let's say, main inspirations. So first of all, what we see nowadays is that a lot of companies or, let's say, business model innovators are ahead of their competition. So business model innovation has become, during the, let's say, last 10 to 15 years, really a major driver of success. So it's not enough to be just good in product innovation anymore, but innovating the business model is becoming more and more important. But that's what we can see. But let's say the paradox is that most companies, they don't have the right tools to be innovative when it comes to their business model. So there's a huge gap between the importance of business model innovation and the tools that are available to be innovative in this particular area. And so this was the, let's say, first intention. We came up with the idea, why don't we develop a toolkit that can really help companies to become more systematic when it comes to business models and business model innovations. And on another inspiration is that innovation, that's not a secret, is rarely entirely new. So many innovations are based on a recombination of existing concepts, ideas that are creatively recombined to a new concept. And so we thought, why don't we look into the recipes for business model innovation? Are there any guidelines, or we call it patterns, that could be used by entrepreneurs, companies, to become more systematic when it comes in designing their business models? There are many different examples from other areas, let's say for architectural innovations, for product innovations, where they are already existing kind of sets of concepts and patterns that can be used. And we thought, why not creating such a toolkit or set of, let's say, recipes for business models? That was more or less the overall idea behind the book.
So you've dove into this a little bit already, but I want to ask anyway, and that's, what makes your book different from others regarding the same or similar topic?
I think the let's say, what is unique about our book is that we don't just provide a process or, let's say, systematic steps companies, entrepreneurs, or anybody who's interested in designing new business models can use, but we really also provide the recipes. So what are the business model designs, business model patterns that can be used by anybody to design a breakthrough business models in their own industry or market? And I think this is really unique because such thing hasn't existed before when it comes to business model innovation.
And Michaela, how would you suggest the reader engage with your book? Is this one they can jump in and jump out, cherry picking information, or should they really, start it from the beginning and read all the way through?
I think there are different ways to jump into the book. I mean, when we talk about the overall structure, so we have three main, let's say, parts of our book. And the first part covers more or less the basics of business models and business model innovation. So if anybody wants to first start with the basic, it could start directly with the part one. And then we have the major part are the 55 patterns that I already introduced. So, and there he can jump in any one of the patterns and go through each pattern after the other. So it's the reader's really free in discovering our book. So it's based on a really simple structure, and so the reader can have one pattern per day or 55 in a row. So it's really he's really flexible in reading this book, I would say.
So, Michaela, now that you gave us the purpose and a little bit of background behind the book, let's take a deep dive into the content. Will you give us, or take the next 5 to 8 minutes and really take us through what your book is all about?
Sure. So, as I already said, we have 3 main parts in the book. So, the first part is providing the reader with our introduction on a business model concept itself. So, I think everybody knows what is a product or what is a service, but what is really a business model? We help the reader in providing a framework. So we say a business model is based on 4 main principles, 4 main dimensions. So it's the what is provided to the customer, so the value proposition, then the who, the customer segment, and the why, the value chain, the how and the well is the value chain, and the why it's the profit formula. So we provide, first of all, a framework to explain what is a business model. And then in the first part, we also introduced the Business Model Navigator. So the Business Model Navigator is really the process that entrepreneurs or companies should follow when they want to design a breakthrough business model. And then in the core of the Business Model Navigator, there are the 55 or the concept of the patterns, which is explained more in depth. So we introduced the overall logic behind what does it mean to creatively recombine business models. And in the part 1 as well, we talk about how if, let's say, an entrepreneur came up with a great business model concept, how he can really manage the change, let's say. So define a plan of action and become more, let's say, specific in terms of actions he has to do. So that's the first part of the book. So it's really how can we drive business model innovation? What is a business model in general? And how are the different process steps of the Business Model Navigator? Then we have the second part, and this is really the heart and the core of the book. The second part introduces the 55 business model patterns. And for each pattern, the reader will find an explanation of the origins of the patterns. So which company or which entrepreneur was the first who ever used this pattern. Just give let's say, a background on the pattern itself. Of course, we will also explain the pattern. So what is the principle applied in this business model? There we explain that how the what, the who, the how and the why, how they interact, and how is really the business model in terms of the design. And then we also explain and introduce much more examples. So we call the section the innovators, where we go and or we explain many more examples of innovators or companies that have used these patterns in the past to innovate the business model in their own industry. And also for each pattern, there are different recommendations when and how this pattern should be applied and what an entrepreneur has to take into account when he wants to apply a specific pattern to design a business model. And then after this second main part where we have these 55 models, we have a third part where we give some tips and tricks about how can an entrepreneur, a company really implement our concept, so the 55 models together with the Business Model Navigator. So what does he have to do really when he wants now start in action and design a business model on his or her own? So this is more or less the structure of the book. As I said, the 55 models are really the core, since they provide an excellent and powerful tool for anybody to think of a breakthrough business model design. And that's the overall structure.
So, Michaela, if the reader could only take away one concept, principle, or action item out of the entire book, everything you just discussed, and those 55 models that you were mentioning, what would you want that to be?
Well, based on my experience, and I would say there are two concepts that are giving us inspiration to entrepreneurs and can also be used in practice. So the first one is the Business Model Innovation Map. The Business Model Innovation Map can be found on the inside front cover. So the Business Model Innovation Map gives in one picture all the 55 different business model patterns, and they are presented in form of a tube map. So it's a very simple and catchy, let's say, illustration of the 55 models in different lines. And in this graph, the reader can find all the 350 business models we actually investigated to come up with the 55 models. So that's the first one. And the second one are the pattern cards, which are explained in the books. The pattern cards are a tool which we basically developed how these 55 models can be used. So it's a card set on which the reader or the entrepreneur can then find all the 55 models explained in a very practical and concise way. And I would say this tool is something he can take out of the book, which is really helpful in practice.
Excellent. Do you have a favorite quote from your book?
Well, so my favorite quote of the book is really, since it summarizes, let's say, the main result is that 90% of all new business models aren't actually new. They are based on 55 existing patterns. That's what we found out in our research. Since most of the business model innovations really can be traced back to one or two or three of these 55 models. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel when you want to design a new business model. You can use the 55 models which are covered in the book and think about how could you creatively recombine it with your own, let's say, products. How can you transfer these models into your own industry? And that's why it's the favorite quote of my book.
Excellent. And Michaela, I can't get away without asking this question. And obviously, as an author, I'm really interested in your opinion. But if there's only one book you could recommend to our listeners, based on the way it created a paradigm shift for you or impacted your life, what book would you recommend?
Well, it's not I think a lot of readers will already know this book, but anyway, I would recommend it. It's the Blue Ocean Strategy book. I was fascinated when I read it back in 2006, since it was, let's say, one of the first books to really introduce the concept of business model innovation, or they call it value innovation, and describe nicely in this metaphor of red and blue oceans the power of creating new markets and be different than the competitors. And I think this is really the core of business model innovation. So the book influenced the way of my thinking, my research, what I'm interested in as a manager and entrepreneur. And so, I would say Blue Ocean Strategy was definitely a book which inspired a lot of my work. And I can really recommend it to any reader.
Excellent recommendation. Yes, very popular book. So we haven't had it referenced all that much. So I'm glad that you brought it back up. Michaela, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to get more information on you and your book, The Business Model Navigator?
Well, they can visit the BMI Lab site. This is the website of Spinoff, which is basically founded based on our research. So on the site www.bmi-lab.ch, the readers can find more information about the Business Model Navigator, and also on the book itself, on the practical tools that come with the book. And there they find much more information about also different offerings, presentations. I would say on the website they can find everything they need to get more background information on the book itself and also on the 55 concepts.
Great. Well, Michaela, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book with us.
Yeah, welcome. It was a pleasure. And thanks for having me. Wade.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you'd like more information on Michaela or her book, The Business Model Navigator, you can check out the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea?
Head over to the elpodcast.com,
where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free.
That's the elpodcast.com.
Till the next time, keep it on the EL.